back at the desk with us. Will?
Yes.
Do you have a problem with this?
Absolutely not. I love the policy. I think it's a fairly simple analysis. If you stand up with that flag on your shirt representing this nation, the least you can do is to show respect and honor for the nation at large. It's not an opportunity to run out your pet causes, virtuous or not, whatever individual thing you might stand for, whatever changes you might want. It is your time to serve and represent this nation as a whole. And to tell you this, I'd say this, I think 90% of people, maybe more, agree with me on this. The only difference is people make exceptions when they're causes that they like. If the person doing the kneeling, if the person enacting the protest is doing something for a cause that you like, then you like it. But I'll just play this little thought experiment out. Imagine the worst possible scenario. Imagine the most vile cause you can think of. Maybe it's racist, maybe it's sexist, misogynistic. Imagine that. And imagine a player who is somehow advocating for that vile cause, and he or she chooses to kneel in that scenario. Will you applaud in that scenario as well? Will you support in that scenario as well? I doubt it. 90% of people know this is a time where you stand for something larger than yourself. It's this country and this country's ideals, and you should give it the respect and honor it deserves.
You're completely wrong in so many ways, but in this simplest of ways. The United States of America, first of all, your First Amendment rights is about freedom of speech, freedom of expression. And the fact of the matter is that if you are an American citizen, you have every right to kneel for the flag. Now, there are ramifications, there are consequences, and there's no question about that. But for the U.S. Soccer Federation to mandate that you stand and you stand respectfully, no, you don't have a right to do that. It goes against the fabric of what America is all about. And it really is that simple to me. It's no real argument for me to make other than that. The National Football League encourages you, but doesn't necessarily mandate. Now, the NBA tries to mandate it, but even back in the day when Mahmoud Abdul-Rauf refused to acknowledge the national anthem, Commissioner Stern pulled him to the side and basically let him know, be in the locker room doing all of that stuff. Don't be out there because you're going to alienate our fan base. We know you have a right to do it, but there's a ramification to all of this. And yes, those individuals will have to be cognizant of that. But for an organization to represent the United States of America, yet to ignore one of its principles, which is freedom of speech and freedom of expression, in order to make sure that their federation gets to invoke what they want to invoke, I think it's wrong. And then it gets to the realm of hypocritical, because when you consider the fact that a guy like Tim Howard and Abby Weinbach back in the past spoke out against foreign players being allowed on the U.S. team, they weren't inclusionary in that regard, and there was no punishment involving that, but there would be a punishment because you refrained from standing for the national anthem. I got a problem with that. I really do. Go ahead, Max.
It's not a government organization. USA, Team USA, it's a private organization. So as long as it's non-discriminatory to the employees, they can do whatever they want. It's not an issue of whether or not they have the right to. It's an issue of how we feel about it. And I feel as you do about it. I agree with you that if your point is I disagree with you if the point is they don't have a right to do it. They do. Private organization, little misleading, right? Team USA, people think it's attached to the government somehow. But I agree with you in the basic sentiment. The idea that Will, that you brought up last week, I believe it was, that if you kneel during the national anthem, you're somehow against the whole thing. Well, then by that logic, if you stand for the national anthem, you're for the whole thing. You're not endorsing everything that this country has ever done or everything that this country in the current government, et cetera. You're not saying it's a perfect country if you stand. You're honoring it. Just as if you kneel, you have the right to decide what about the flag you are protesting, particularly when the national anthem, the original lyrics were pro-slavery, or at least anti-slavery in one stanza. I can understand why people say, maybe not for this song. Or it may be a million other reasons why they're specific instances that they're protesting. And to your point, Will, about the nature of the protest affecting whether or not people would support it, where naturally on a personal level, that's true. But I'll remind you that the ACLU fought for the American Nazi Party to march in Skokie, Illinois. The ACLU fought for that. As abhorrent as the message was, the idea. Now, I'm not saying it's the same rights issue. It's not. As I mentioned, it's a private organization. But that's my general sentiment. Stephen A., I agree with you.
And that's the problem with even bringing up the ACLU scenario. You're simply wrong. It's almost impossible to outflank me on a free speech issue. I can't imagine a human being who's more pro-free speech and First Amendment than I am. You're just misapplying it. The First Amendment is protection against government interference. It is not protection against anyone, anywhere telling you when and what you can't say. If you doubt that, I suggest you try it right now. This company, ESPN, can control what you say on its airwaves. You maybe get away with it for the next 30 seconds, but you might not be here tomorrow. The First Amendment protects you from the government. This organization, like any other, can tell its employees, in this case, its invited athletes, what they can and cannot do
but should
at any
they,
given
Will?
time.
It's not that they can or can't.
Now we get to
they?
should. It's not a First Amendment issue. We've established that. It's about what you choose to applaud. You, in your words, said this, Max. It's honorable to stand for the national anthem. It's honorable to stand for the flag. Doesn't it, by logic, then flow that it's an act of dishonor to not do that?
No, it depends on what your personal. It depends personally what your statement is. That's the nature of free speech, and that's why. In terms of the way I feel
not
about
every
it,
dishonor is wrong. You're right. There can be virtuous reasons to do something dishonorable, but you can't escape the fact that when you kneel, when everyone else is standing for that flag, and they're honoring it, that you're choosing to dishonor it.
No,
you can explain why, but that's what you're choosing to do.
Dishonor a certain part of this country's history or even ongoing practices.
Here's where I want to go back to what you're saying. You got me there, but here's what I want you to understand what I was thinking. I understand that the U.S. Soccer Federation is private. It's not public. But what I was thinking about is U.S. Federation, Olympic competition. So what I'm trying to say to you is this. Even though it's private, and I get that, so literally speaking, you're absolutely right, because I wasn't trying to imply in a literal perspective that it was, First Amendment in that regard. What I'm saying is that you're leaning on the red, white, and blue. You're talking about, okay, by being a member of this federation, it's the United States Soccer Federation. It involves itself in international competition. You're representing our country. So in that respect is where I was coming from when I'm talking about what we're standing for. I didn't mean to come across in a literal sense.
And incidentally, in terms of my feeling about it, in terms of all our personal feelings about it, I do feel much better if someone kneels in a domestic matchup. It's two American teams playing each other on America. And I feel differently, just my basic gut reaction is different if it's an international competition, even a friendly, because it's like airing your dirty laundry. We're just talking about the way we feel about it personally. To your point about what's allowed and what's not allowed and what should and shouldn't happen, there is a chilling effect on free speech when powerful entities mandate that you exercise it according to their prerogatives and their beliefs. And here, the national anthem, you have to stand for the national anthem, especially considering the original lyrics for the song. I could see strong reason why someone wouldn't want to represent themselves or their country that way.
It's not a political statement. U.S. Soccer is not making...
They're making it.
It's not a political statement.
Then why do the national anthem in the first place?
It's simply an act of respect.
To?
That's all it is. Asking someone, when you are invited and you voluntarily join a symbol, which is a national team, to represent this in country, which, by the way, by its very nature is broad.
Yep.
By its very nature,
and I would argue that the greatest way. I would argue that the greatest way, arguably, the greatest way to represent this country is by showing that you are not mandated, like in most other places in the world, to stand.
That's
during
a
the
good argument,
anthem.
Max. But here's where I would come back to you, Will. Yeah, you're right about that in terms of the players being invited, voluntarily deciding to go. But you're putting all the onus on them. What about the onus on the Federation? Since you want to call yourself representatives of the United States of America, but you don't want to exercise what it stands for. You see what I'm saying? The Federation.
The flaw you two are making is that just because you have a right, you should always be able to exercise that right. It's like you're taking judgment out of the scenario.
You're talking
but it's not black and white the way you're painting it out. Because again, you're not wrong, but it's a fine line here. Yeah, the players have an obligation. I don't disagree with that, but I'm saying there's an obligation on the part of the Federation that represents the United States of America to represent what the United States of America stands for as well. So if you want to disagree with that, then of course we can debate that till the cows come home. I'm saying both have equal responsibility responsibilities. There's no right or wrong
And
here.
to
But
my-
if you're the federation and you say it's the United States Soccer Federation, how are you going to mandate something when that's not what we do as a nation?
Okay, and to
that's
my
not what we do.
to my thought experiment, that if
Okay.
there was an elite athlete in this country who was a white nationalist, possibly a Nazi,
Right.
and he said, during the Olympics, in my service to this country, I will be kneeling because I do not like the diverse
No, we
policy of the
wouldn't like
United
that.
States.
Of course
the inclusive
the commentary
No,
matters.
it's not about what you like or not. Of course.
Right.
In certain scenarios, he would have a right.
Right.
Would you applaud him?
No.
Would you say a rule that requires him to act respectfully of this country, would you say that's a bad rule?
And I'm telling you, it would be. I'm telling you, you're right about that. But the flip side is, we graduated to that point, didn't we? Because once upon a time, you could do that, and you could get away with that. And then all of a sudden, we recognize that we live in different times, and that
everybody,
can't happen anymore.
We have, before and after that, everyone's rights are intact.
Okay.
What we're talking about is whether or not their behavior
you're
should be
using-
applauded.
if you're
It's a great
using
discussion. I understand both
a
sides of it.
hyperbolic example to demonstrate the fact that we don't endorse all, not the idea of speech, but the speech itself. Well, of course we have
Yep.
personal